Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being on the call here. We see people filing in, so we'll just give them a minute or so, and then we'll get rolling. Okay. Again, good morning, and thank you for being on this very important webinar about business texting and 10DLC registration. My name is David Anandraj. I'm responsible for product management here at BCM1, and I will be your host for today's session. Couple of quick housekeeping things before we get started on the content. We are recording this session, and it will be available to you in a couple of ways. We will send out a link to the recording after it becomes available, most likely within about a day or so. And then also, we will host the content of the recording on our Flowroute knowledge base for those of you who would like to take a look at it in the future. Also, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. Feel free to use that to ask questions. And our intent is towards the end of our presentation here, we'll field as many of those as possible and get you answers. We have a few presenters this morning. As I mentioned earlier, I've introduced myself. In addition to me, we have May Valadares and Erica Dugson, who are going to walk us through actual 10DLC registration process, in particular the form, and how to do good, successful 10DLC registration. And we look forward to their content and you being able to benefit from it. Next slide, May. So here's our agenda for the day. I will walk through some context, history, background, and basics about 10DLC registration. And we've also paid attention to several questions that you all have raised, especially in the last few weeks, about 10DLC registration. And then May will walk through the last three items you see here: brand and campaign registration, as well as associating numbers to those brands and campaigns. With that, let's get started with 10DLC basics. A quick recap of what business texting looked like before 10DLC came along. And for those of you for whom the acronym may be new, that stands for 10-digit long code, which is essentially an indication of message enabling a DID number. So business texting was not different from what we would call one-on-one texting, for example, using our mobile phones prior to the advent of 10DLC, which is about 2.5, 3 years ago, roughly speaking. When it was before 10DLC, there was very little scrutiny on the content because most people, again, texting was not as popular of a customer engagement channel specifically for businesses at that time. And mobile providers were fine with just leaving one pathway into their ecosystem for both one-on-one text as well as business text. However, there were increasing instances of abuse, not just in the volume of text, business text that were being sent out. People were deliberately trying to skirt around established ATIS guidelines, but there was also a violation of content in the actual messaging itself. And so that required some policing, if you will, by the mobile providers. I use the acronym here, MNO, Mobile Network Operators. So those would be T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T, and the like. So 10DLC really is an effort by the mobile providers. It has a set of policies as well as particular information that is required in order to ensure that business texts are actually delivered, and then any unwanted, illegitimate texts are blocked and not delivered to customers. A couple of quick things I do want to point out about 10DLC, and this has come up on and off in our interactions with customers. 10DLC and 10DLC registration is not unique to Flowroute. If you're in the space, you would be familiar with the fact that it is a requirement across the board for every messaging service provider that is in the business. And more importantly, it is not overseen by a regulatory authority like the FCC. So that last point is really important, because what that implies is that there is no level playing field with super clear directions and instructions that apply to every messaging provider and every mobile network operator across the board. That is not true. So it is indicative of the ebb and flow and the frequently changing requirements for 10DLC and 10DLC registration over the last 2.5, 3 years. 10DLC registration is an absolute requirement. It's mandatory for any entity intending to do business texting. There are no exceptions whatsoever. And then finally, there are pretty significant fines, and I've listed the range here from $500 to $10,000. Some of them are called severity zero or SEV zero fines, which not only have a financial penalty, but also have implications for your ability to continue to do business. You do need to get back into the good graces of the MNOs before you're able to restart your business text. So again, these are very important notes to keep in mind, especially the fact that there are no exceptions to 10DLC registration. Two acronyms come up on and off in our conversations: A2P, P2P. The simplest way to describe them, other than explain what the acronyms stand for, is that P2P is consumer texting. Like I referenced earlier, this would be, for example, you and I exchanging text messages from the native messaging client on our mobile devices, for example. A2P, on the other hand, simply is business texting. In other words, you are engaging in a conversation or a triggering of a marketing message, for example, for the purpose of business. It is not for personal one-to-one interaction. More often than not, it does imply that there is some software in the middle, some sort of application that allows and facilitates that conversation. Finally, Flowroute's platform for messaging is only intended for business use. It is not meant for one-to-one or personal text messaging, and therefore, all of Flowroute's messaging is A2P, regardless of the actual use cases. And we'll go through that in just a moment. So therefore, no exceptions to 10DLC registration, since A2P is 10DLC at the moment. Next slide, please. As you are likely aware, Flowroute blocked outbound unregistered messages on April 17th. So I do want to talk through that. I know we explained some of it in our notification. We did send out at least 4 notifications prior to April 17th describing sort of the impending blockage of unregistered messages. In fact, there are a couple of the more recent ones literally said in the middle of the notification in bright orange, if you do not register, you will have a blockage of some kind or another. The most recent one particularly saying there will be a complete blockage of all outbound messages. So the thing I do want to point out is that the April 17th action wasn't completely out of the blue or a sort of a knee-jerk reaction. This has been coming for quite some time, but in the earliest notification was back in 2022. In addition to the notification that we did send out, we were exposed, one as a business, and more importantly, you as a customer, to significant fines. I referenced the dollar amounts in my earlier slide, and those are all pass-through fines. In other words, if the mobile provider charges us any of those fines, and several of those, by the way, are per instance, we would have passed those on to you, and we felt it was an unfair financial penalty to pass those along when we were continuing to allow outbound unregistered 10DLC messages. And finally, our messaging provider was very clear in indicating to us that if we continue to allow this open door, if you will, and not only will it provide blockage for violators, if you will, but it could potentially impact our overall messaging business and shut down all messaging for all customers. And that was a risk we were unwilling to take, hence the blockage for all outbound messages on April 17th. Several of you have expressed your frustration about submissions that you have recently done. And one, we want to acknowledge that. We understand where you're coming from. but want to talk through several of the reasons for that delay, and then secondly, some solutions both on our end and on your end that could help with the overall resolution. One, we obviously received a record number of submissions after we sent out the notification for outbound blockage. We understand that there's a large quantity of those that we are working our way through. Secondly, we have repeatedly heard through our customer success team reluctance to actually perform 10DLC registration. Again, if you recall what I said in my first slide here, there are no exceptions whatsoever to 10DLC registration. If you're using Flowroute for messaging for 10DLC, you must register. And so it takes us time to repeatedly explain the need for 10DLC registration, despite our prior communications and just the general understanding in the business space for 10DLC registration. So again, please do note that you have to register, and it would help us if you were to go ahead and submit that without reluctance to doing so. We also noticed that a good majority of the submissions actually contain inaccurate data. And our hope here, again, we put some content on our knowledge base, but May will walk through in great detail what qualifies as an accurate, good, successful submission. So please do pay attention to that here in the next few minutes. What could be done to resolve the delay in processing registrations? We have on our end increased resources, put more folks to work through those submissions that have come in recently. We've also created some additional tools and increased our ability from a systems perspective to review, first off, just the initial submissions as well, but also make sure that we are following up on ones that customers have questions about, or especially on the inaccurate submissions, making sure that we reach out to you. The next two here are what you could do to help. One, quickly respond to our reach out to you, especially if there are errors on the initial submission. Please do, one, respond, and two, quickly fix those errors. We will point to, our customer success team has been pointing out what things you need to resolve in order to be able to move forward with a successful submission. And then finally, again, May's content here will help with this. Submit a registration with correct data the first go around, so there's no back and forth between us and you to ensure that there is a successful submission. Next slide, please. There's been some question around how would I know that there is a branded campaign associated with my numbers. By the end of next week, in Flowroute's managed portal, on the DIDs portion, the DIDs section of the managed portal, you will be able to see on a DID basis whether or not there is a brand and campaign ID associated with your particular DID. Today, we already are showing you whether or not there is a successful registration. So we will say registered or unregistered, but we will enhance that to show campaign and brand IDs by the end of next week. In the interim, we ask you to reach out to Flowroute support, who will look on our systems and provide you that brand and campaign ID should you need it. Here are some questions, again, back to my umbrella comment about there being no exceptions, but these have come up, and I'll address these three in particular. What if you don't send outbound messages? The simple response, and this has been our history across various BCM1 brands, all it takes is just one response, reply to one of the inbound only messages, and that causes a whole host of issues to occur within the 10DLC ecosystem. So while it seems on the face of it a legitimate use case to be exempted from 10DLC registration if all you do is inbound messages, we do ask you to do 10DLC registration even if that's your use case. Conversational messages, again, harkening back to my earlier comment, if you're using Flowroute for messaging, it's an A2P service. A2P service requires 10DLC registration, regardless of the kind of messaging that you're using it for. Finally, 10DLC registration is not just for automatic generated messages, including marketing messages and so on. There's a whole host of use cases or campaign types. Again, May will walk you through that here shortly. So short answer through all three questions is they do require 10DLC registration. For ticket numbers related to an actual 10DLC registration that you have submitted through our jot form, you will receive an email response once you complete the jot form, and that email will have the ticket number connected with your submission. Next slide, please. What about corrections, etc., that you need to make to 10DLC registrations you've already submitted? If your intent is to just correct existing data that you already have submitted without any additions from a numbers perspective, you could keep the existing ticket email chain going and just supply your corrections to that same ticket. But if you want to add or change numbers to existing brands or campaigns, please do provide us those brand and campaign IDs along with the numbers you want to either add, remove, or change for those campaigns that you've already registered. Lastly, sole proprietor. This has come up a couple different times, so I do want to talk to this a bit before handing the baton off to May. I do want to differentiate a 10DLC campaign type that is called sole proprietor from the actual business type that is sole proprietor. So what we are saying here is that you could continue to turn in a registration as a sole proprietor business type, and I'll talk to the solution here in a minute. What we are saying we aren't able to do is take in a campaign registration using a social security number instead of an EIN. And mentioned here, we believe the risks of storing your social security number outweighs the benefit of being able to go through with a registration. And there are also pretty heavy reporting requirements directly with the MNOs for processing social security number based sole proprietor campaign registrations. My suspicion is primarily because of the PII concerns they have, the MNOs have as well. So again, if you're a sole proprietor as a business, your best option is to procure an EIN from the IRS and register as a low volume mixed campaign, and we are able to move forward. If that is not an option, unfortunately, at this time, we're unable to take a sole proprietor campaign type using your social security number. So I hope these answers give you some relief and some understanding of what we're doing to move campaigns and brand registrations forward. With that, I'll pass the mic on to May Valladares, who will walk you through actual campaign and brand registrations. May?
Thank you, David. So I know the 10DLC programs set by the MNOs were based on guidelines from the CTIA or the Cellular Telecommunications Industry Association, with the intention to stop unwanted messages to consumer devices. So 10DLC is a solution to completely eradicate SMS-based spam and phishing attacks. 10DLC registration can be a tedious and lengthy process, but if you do it correctly, your registration will go through smoothly. So I will walk you through the process on how and what information is needed to register your 10DLC brands and campaigns. So 10DLC registration is a three-step process that the customer must go through before they can start using messaging on their numbers. So first is we have the brand registration. So a brand is the company or entity initiating messages to the consumer. So each customer will need to set up a brand to show they are the business that owns the SMS content. So the brand answers the question, who is sending the message? Each brand will go through an identity verification process, and this will come back with the status almost immediately, but can take a few minutes to update. So once confirmed and returns a verified brand status, you can now proceed with registering a campaign. So a campaign in 10DLC does not refer to marketing. A campaign is a collection of information used to identify use case and CTIA compliance for carrier evaluation. So a campaign requires details such as message flow, campaign description, and sample messages to name a few. So it describes the intended goal of the messages. For example, account notification, customer care, or 2FA. So the campaign answers the question, what kind of messages the brand is sending. So the campaign will be shared to the CNP and will be pre-vetted before sending the campaign to the DCA for approval. So the campaign vetting can take from 5 to 7 days, and due to the increasing number of 10DLC registration, it could take weeks. If the DCA already confirms the campaign or returns a DCA election completed status, this means that the campaign is approved. And you can now start assigning SMS-enabled numbers to that campaign. So number assignment can take a few minutes to complete. So to sum up, these are the two important requirements under 10DLC. Businesses must identify who they are to the carrier networks that is under the brand registration. Then businesses must register what type of messages they are sending, which is in the campaign registration. So let's go into detail on what information is needed to register a brand. So TCR validates the EIN, the legal company name and legal company address with third-party independent sources, and confirms the existence of the brand with a verification status. It's either verified or unverified. So customers who register their brand for the first time will have to go through the brand registration process. If a customer previously registered a brand and just wants to add a campaign, they need to provide the brand ID, which is a 7-digit alphanumeric ID. The legal company name is the name of the business you are registering. So keep in mind that the legal company name should exactly match the name under which the business is registered with the IRS for US businesses. Then we have the brand name or the DBA, which stands for doing business as. So this is a trade name or pseudonym used by companies that do not operate under the registered company name. So make sure that the DBA matches the brand represented by the website or your online presence, because any significant mismatch can result in a rejection. The country of registration is the country where the business or the brand is registered. Then we have the business entity. So for the business entity, it can either be public, which is if a company with public ownership and shares that trade on a public market. Private, a private company is a firm held by private ownership. Then we have the nonprofit. So this is an organization whose aim is to make money for a social or political purpose or to provide a service that people need rather than to make profit. So companies that are legitimate nonprofit organization must have a determination letter and a 501c3 status in order to be verified as such. And lastly, we have government. So the tax ID or the EIN is used in conjunction with the company's name, address, and other information to ensure that TCR performs a background investigation on the correct company. So it is a 9-digit number in the EIN letter. So you must verify the details in the EIN letter that was sent to your customer by the IRS. So if your primary business registration is in Canada, you can use the business number rather than the corporation or registry ID numbers. We will only accept the first 9 numeric digits in the business number. For US businesses, if the brand came back unverified, the EIN letter will be the document that we can use to dispute the rejection. So the EIN letter contains the accurate EIN, legal company name, and legal company address associated with the brand that is on file with IRS. State-level documentation will not be sufficient as verification is done at the federal level. Next is the legal business address that should also match what is in the EIN letter. Then we have website. So the brand's website or online presence is used to verify if the business is who they say they are. So even if the customer avoids putting their website, the DCA will search for the business to see if there's any associated website. So here are some of the do's and don'ts for the website or online presence. First, it must be a working website or online presence that the customer has. This can include a social media page as long as the DCA can access it and verify the business. You must also have the opt-in language or SMS disclosure, and it should be complete. You must also have the privacy policies that must indicate that the information collected will not be shared with any third parties. So some small businesses do not have a website but use a business social media presence such as Facebook or Instagram sites. So in those cases, you may create a post with both the full SMS disclosure and a privacy policy link or the actual text of a short privacy policy. You can make that social media post sticky so that it always appears at the top of the social media presence for this business. Another option is to link it in the About section, which applies to Facebook sites. Privacy policies can be linked to Google Documents or written out in the social media post. Website must support a functioning age gate mechanism when associated with, but not limited to, alcohol, tobacco, and any other age restricted content that must comply with legal regulations. Do not provide an unsecured website. Do not also use personal social media profiles if the brand has a business profile. If there's any prohibited content on the website, the campaign will be rejected. So to comply with 10DLC, certain requirements must be followed when collecting consumer phone numbers on a website, regardless of its intended purpose. So the following conditions should be satisfied. First is the web form should indicate an opt-in language to obtain consumers' permission to send them messages and an explanation of what they're signing up for. An effective opt-in language ensures compliance and enables express consent. SMS disclosure should be complete enough to enable the person viewing them to realize that they are consenting to receive messaging from the business. So here is an example of an opt-in language or an SMS disclosure. It should have the following elements. First is it should specify what kind of messages will be sent. Then it should have a link to the company's terms and conditions and privacy policies that indicate what information is collected, how it is used, how users can opt out, and must explicitly state that the information will not be shared or sold to third parties for the purpose of marketing. It must also provide an opt-out information on how consumers can opt out of future messaging. It should include a disclosure about the message and data rates. And lastly, the message frequency on how many number of messages per month or per week. So all web forms that require phone number to be entered on a website must include this opt-in language and privacy policy. Next we have is the vertical type. So vertical type is the industry market which best fits the brand's business space. Many of the vertical types offered as a selection by TCR are very broad. So choose the category that most accurately fits your business type when registering your brand. And lastly, for the brand registration, we have the contact information. So this is the name, the phone number, and the email address of the contact person who manages the messaging. You will receive a confirmation that indicates the brand was successfully verified. If errors were found within the information submitted, The team will detail what needs to be corrected before the brand can be resubmitted. Note that once the brand is verified, you will not be able to change the entity type, the EIN, and the legal company name. So if the brand needs to be updated, you would need to delete the brand and register again using the correct information. So now that you have a verified brand, you can now proceed registering the campaign. So as mandated by MNOs, TCR requires to declare a use case at the beginning of the campaign registration process. So the use case describes the intended goal of the messages. For example, account notification or 2FA. There are two types of use cases. Standard use case, which is immediately available for all qualified registered brands and do not require a vetting or pre or post approval by MNOs. Then we have the special use case, which are sensitive in nature and also can be called as critical in nature and may require vetting or pre or post registration approval by MNOs. Requirements may also vary according to each MNO for special use cases. Some use cases may also require a subcategory. So you must choose at least 2 and up to 5 subcategories. This is applicable to low volume, mix, charity, carrier exemptions, and social use case. Next, we have the campaign attributes. So during the campaign registration process, you will be asked to answer yes or no to indicate whether the campaign has certain attributes such as embedded link or embedded phone number. So please make sure your content attributes are correct while setting up your campaign because these fields can't be changed. So you need to have a new campaign if you get rejected for any of these reasons. So if the brand originates loans or financing of any kind, including third-party financing, select yes in the direct lending or loan arrangement attributes. And as mentioned earlier, websites must support a functioning age gate mechanism when associated with, but not limited to, alcohol and any other age-restricted content that must comply with legal regulations. So this means that the age gate mechanism should include the date of birth verification during the consent opt-in of the consumer. So the non-acceptable age gating function includes, but not limited to, yes or no responses. Next, we have the campaign description. So for the campaign description, it must describe the intended purpose of the overall messages. While it can include a short description of the brand, the majority of the text should describe the use case and how you will be using SMS or MMS. So your campaign description should answer these following questions: who you are, who do you want to reach, and why are you sending out messages? Then we have the campaign sample messages. So ensure that the selected use case is consistent with the sample messages. Sample messages should be different from each other. Give examples of what messages you might send so that the DCA can see how the exchange looks like. So this should be specific to the campaign's intended use case and not a general set of messages that have nothing to do with the use case. So the carriers are getting stricter on checking the sample messages. So a few must-have for sample messages. So brand name must be in the sample messages and an instruction on how to opt out must be appended. You must have at least 2 sample messages with a minimum length of 20 characters for each. It is important that your campaign description, your selected use case, and the sample messages match, because any discrepancies can cause your campaign to be rejected. For the message enabled numbers, so these are the telephone numbers that will be assigned to the campaign. So one campaign can have up to 49 numbers. One thing to remember is that in the jot form, you only need to provide the DIDs and should not include toll-free numbers because toll-free numbers undergo a different verification process. Another important detail that is being reviewed is the call to action or the message flow. So a call to action is an invitation to the consumer to opt into a messaging campaign. In other words, this is how opt-in is obtained or how the brand obtains consent from consumers to send them messages. So message senders should display a clear and concise call to action with appropriate disclosures to consumers about the type and purpose of messaging the consumers will receive. So the key point here is to be accurate and descriptive. The call to action answers the questions: how does the company obtain the phone numbers? And what medium are they using to obtain these numbers they are texting to? So provide information on how you acquire the phone numbers and how you acquire consent from these individuals to receive messages from the brand. So even if they are existing customers, you need to be able to provide an explanation on how those numbers were obtained and how those customers consent to receive SMS from your company. Then we have the opt-in message. This is a response to the consumer opting in and should include the brand name, confirmation of opt-in enrollment to a recurring message campaign, how to get help, and a clear description of how to opt out. The opt-out message is the response to the stop keyword and may include the brand name, but should include an acknowledgement of the opt-out request and a confirmation that no further messages will be sent. Then we also have the help response message, which is the response to the help keyword and may include the brand name and additional support contact information. And lastly, we have the contact information. This is to easily identify the customer submitting the registration. So here are a few things to remember. Provide complete information and verify that the content attributes are accurate. Provide detailed explanation on consumers, how consumers opt in, and privacy policy for website when collecting phone numbers. Do not provide content attributes that don't match the other fields. Do not provide sample messages, campaign description, or website information that is inconsistent with each other. Do not include a non-working website. Remember that campaigns are being reviewed manually by the DCA, and due to the manual nature of the 10DLC vetting process, it increases the time it takes for the campaign to be ready for 10DLC traffic. Another thing to note, these are the information that are crucial to get the campaigns approved. So we have the call to action or the message flow, the campaign description, the sample messages, opt-in, opt-out, and help messages. So we suggest paying close attention to entering correct and up-to-date information to allow the brand and campaign to be swiftly verified and approved. And now for the final step in the 10DLC registration process, which is the number assignment. So the following criteria must be met before completing the last step. So the brand must be verified, the campaign must be approved, and the number must be enabled for SMS. One thing to note about number assignment is that you can only associate up to 49 numbers per campaign. If the brand, so here are some things that you can do as a workaround. If the brand has multiple locations or departments, you can avoid associating more than 49 numbers to a campaign by creating separate campaigns based on location or based on department. So just make sure that you include it in your campaign description. You can also create multiple use cases dedicated to the purpose of messaging. So once you have submitted the job form, you should receive an acknowledgement email with the ticket number. You can use that ticket if you need to update the information submitted. Our team will also communicate with you on any missing information through that ticket. If you have numbers that you would like to assign to an already approved or an existing campaign, you can simply open a ticket with a brand ID, campaign ID, and the numbers you want to associate it with. You do not need to submit a job form. Remember that carriers do regular audits and have automated filters in place, so make sure that the information remains true even after the campaign has been approved. Any deceptive action can cause your campaign to be suspended. And that concludes our 10DLC registration process. I will turn you back over to David.
May, thank you very much. That was super thorough, detailed, and walked through various things to keep in mind. So I hope the folks on the call were able to benefit from it. There are several questions I see in the Q&A box. We'll go through those here momentarily. A couple quick things I do want to point out. Erica, if I could ask you, could you walk us through some examples of good and bad responses, especially to key elements such as call to action, campaign description, and sample messages, please?
Sure, David. So for the call to action, this is how an end user consents to receive messages from your brand. So a weak call to action would be something like we send messages to people to sign up on our website. So instead of providing that call to action, instead you can say if someone says they are interested in our services, we send them to our website where we have them review our privacy policy before asking them if they want to start receiving messages from us. If they agree, they must check a box that state they've read the privacy policy and agree to receive messages from us. So it needs to be very detailed. As for the campaign description, a weak example would be something like, my company uses messaging for customer service. Instead, you can say, my company sends financial documents like contracts to our customers and also set appointments for lawn care services. And lastly, for the sample messages, this needs to be a real world example depicting the communication that's expected from the campaign. So a weak sample messages would go something like, this is Joe inquiring about your service. Instead, you can say, hello, this is Joe from ABC Company returning your inquiry about our lawn care service. Your next appointment is scheduled for Tuesday at 2 p.m. If this time still works, text 1. If you need to reschedule, text 2. And if he wants to call you back, text 3. So that's the good and bad examples.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erica. I'll take a couple of questions here. These are sort of higher level questions specific to the messaging service as a whole. What's an MNO? It's a mobile network operator, fancy acronym for AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, US Cellular, et cetera. Who's regulating it, et cetera? So messaging or business texting is a Title I service, information, if you will, information service as opposed to telecom, which is a Title II service and regulated by the FCC. So short answer, no regulatory authority oversight over messaging. With no regulatory agency involved, who is levying and enforcing fines? They come directly from the mobile operators, so MNOs. So again, T-Mobile, Verizon, T-Mobile being one of the more active ones, and with a wide variety of violations and corresponding fees. So they come from the mobile operators through mobile service providers to Flowroute and then pass through to your customer. So that's the chain of how those fines get levied. Erica, could I ask you to answer this question specific to political campaign special use case, please?
Sure. So for the question goes, I'm a political campaign special use case. Is getting a token from campaign verify assist in the process. So the answer to this is For brands that are wanting to register a campaign using a political use case, be aware that this is not immediately available for all brands. Only verified nonprofit brands that have a tax exempt status will have the political use case immediately available. And to be able to be used the political use case, the brand must be registered as nonprofit and political vetting is required. This political vetting process is done via the Campaign Verify. They are a third-party organization that creates these authorization tokens, which signals the campaign registry, wireless carriers, and service providers that the brand has been verified for political use. And Flowroute cannot assist with this process, but you can visit their website for the instructions on how to obtain these tokens. And once you have the campaign verified token, you need to provide it to us for us to import it to your brand. And that's for the political use case.
Thank you. Sorry, Eric, I was talking on mute. There's a second follow-up question here, related to a number and business entity. Does each number have to have its own business entity, or can I use the same business information to register all numbers?
So each brand or business should have their own brand and campaign. If you have multiple businesses that you manage and each one of them has their own EIN, you need to register a brand and campaign for each of those entity.
Perfect. Thank you. I'll answer a few on my end. Someone had asked, these would be easier done via phone as opposed to email. Is there a way to schedule that instead? Unfortunately, as you probably are able to connect the dots based on May's content, as well as mine up front, and then Erica's answers here, the only way to submit, as you can tell, very detailed and clear 10 DLC content is through that jot form today. Unfortunately, we're not able to receive any phone-based submissions. In fact, I would say it would be the wrong way to do it because of the level of detail and clarity needed. It also allows us to use some of our automated tooling on the back end to review those submissions and then turn them in to the appropriate authorities. On that note, a question about, is the campaign registry the one overseeing all submissions and it's not Flowroute directly? So yes and no. And the yes part is a portion of the submission specific to brand and campaign registration goes to TCR, the campaign registry. However, the mobile service provider that actually facilitates the clearinghouse for messaging back and forth also needs to approve campaigns. It's not just TCR. And then it's the TCR plus the mobile provider plus a mobile service provider like Flowroute that need to work hand in hand to have a successful end-to-end registration. So campaign registry alone is not able to deliver the end-to-end service. And I hope that answers that question. Another one on my end, if messaging is not needed, can we disable the messaging feature instead of submitting the 10 DLC form? Absolutely. If you no longer need, or if you have no intention of doing messaging, texting on a number, please do disable that function and you will not be required to do 10 DLC registration. Erica, question about the opt-in language. Does it need to be on every form on our website that that gathers client info?
Yes, it's essential to include the opt-in language on each form, regardless of the reason why you collect phone numbers on your website. Consumers need to be informed that by providing their number, they are consenting to receive messages from your brand.
Thank you. Question about, what if a company has multiple business names? How would that work? Question for you.
You need to
No
be
problem.
able to assess if all those companies have the same EIN or different EIN. We can certainly, if they have the same EIN, we can certainly register them under one brand. We just need to label that in the campaign description that this particular campaign is for this company. and we need to just detail that in the registration, basically.
Got it. I'll take a couple more on my end. Why is there a difference between 800 numbers or toll-free numbers and non-toll-free numbers with regard to texting? And what is Flowroute's answer for that? So yes, there is a difference. And we have in particular stayed away from that in this session because that is a completely separate process known as toll-free verification, not 10DLC registration. Some of the elements there are similar, but again, the process is quite different from 10DLC registration from a brand and campaign perspective. So could you message enable toll-free numbers and do texting through toll-free numbers? Short answer is yes. Flowroute does support that option. We actually provide a CSV file-based submission. So feel free to check that out on your managed portal if you're an existing Flowroute customer. So that's really the key difference between toll-free and non-toll-free. And there's a couple of different questions about fees associated with 10DLC registration. The messaging rates and surcharges page has been up for some time, and it has had as current information as possible based on updates that we have from the mobile providers. We've listed several key fees for quite some time there, especially the brand registration and campaign registration fees. And then here recently, we updated it with all the relevant fines that are referenced, particularly from T-Mobile. Some of them were effective as recently as January 1st of this year. And so, again, those are there on the messaging rates and surcharges a portion of Flowroute's websites. Are there monthly costs? Yes, there are. As of today, we are not passing those on to you, but we will plan on passing those campaign and brand monthly fees to you here shortly. Let's see. I'm looking through and scrolling for some questions here. Call, will this be emailed to you later? Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, there will be both a link to the registration sent to you via email, and then we'll also host this on our knowledge base so you can have access to that. Canadian numbers and sending messages to only the messaging is only outbound to Canadian numbers. The registration is for Canadian numbers and messaging is to Canadian numbers. Do we need to register? At this point, the short answer is yes. Again, much like inbound versus outbound, all it takes is one response to a non-Canadian number, be it a customer responding to you or an outbound text from a Canadian number, and the 10DLC ecosystem gets triggered. So at this point, unfortunately, if you are doing Canadian number registration and your best understanding of your use case is it's only going to Canadian numbers, we do ask you to perform 10DLC registration. A couple final questions here before we wrap it up. Again, the inbound versus outbound, I see several questions surrounding that one. Again, I hear what you're saying, and in fact, it is a legitimate use case, inbound only. Unfortunately, at this time, we do ask that you do 10DLC registration. There are questions surrounding call to action for inbound messages. Again, that and there's several more questions that we are not able to get to. We will be sure and review those and get answers to them as soon as possible, to as many of those as possible. With that, thank you again for your time on the call. I know there's quite a bit of confusion in the general messaging space about 10DLC registration. Our hope is between some of the answers that we provided at the front, as well as May's presentation walking through in great detail how to submit a 10DLC registration successfully, that this has been valuable to you, as well as the answers we provided to several of your questions after May's presentation. Again, the presentation itself will be available to you in a couple of different ways, and we will do our best to look at the other answers, or other questions rather, that we were not able to get to during our session, and get answers for those to you as quickly as possible. Again, thank you for your time, and we appreciate your business as Flowroute's messaging customers, and have a great rest of your day.